Some historians claim that the Netherlands introduced the essential components of today's Western economic model. Both the stock market and the idea of financing companies through the stock market first blossomed in the 17th century Dutch Republic. The Dutch created their first multinational company with the establishment of the Dutch East India Company, also known as the VOC, in 1602. Formed as a joint stock investment, it eventually surpassed all prior aspirations for company success as its influence spread throughout Southeast Asia and even parts of Africa and Japan. Supported by the generous Dutch public, who participated in buying shares of this exciting phenomenon, the VOC had the necessary capital to build a vast private military and navy. The Dutch government granted the company a monopoly on trade in Asia, along with quasi-governmental powers, including the right to wage war, negotiate treaties with local rulers, build forts, establish colonies, strike coins, and imprison and execute convicts. Corporate enterprise combined with government authority, laying the groundwork for modern corporations and global capitalism. The VOC's illustrious history centered around modern-day Jakarta in Indonesia. The company monopolized the trade in nutmeg, mace, and cloves, which was sold across European kingdoms and to Emperor Akbar of the Mughal Empire at 14 to 17 times the price paid in Indonesia. Consequently, Dutch profits soared at the same time that the local economy of the Spice Islands crumbled, because as the sole buyer of spices, the VOC forced prices down for local producers. Inspiration for Dutch capitalistic ventures likely arose from England when King Henry VIII broke from the Catholic Church in 1534 due to his inability to divorce his wife otherwise. He declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England and formally severed ties with the Pope's authority, allowing himself to establish the Church of England as a separate entity. This break from the Catholic Church led to the seizure of monasteries and the redistribution of church land, opening the door for private ownership, wealth accumulation, and capitalist growth. A few decades later, in 1568, the Dutch provinces decided to revolt against the Spanish king, starting what would be known as the 80 Years' War. The rebellious Dutch provinces formally cut ties with Spanish King Philip II in 1581. This was a significant step in Dutch independence that laid down the foundation for the eventual establishment of the Dutch Republic. A massive influx of refugees fleeing Catholic rule in Habsburg-controlled territories migrated to the Netherlands, which embraced religious tolerance. Protestants, Jews, merchants, and more brought with them wealth, trade networks, and expertise in commerce and finance, which fueled innovation. The Dutch Golden Age commenced at about 1580, lasting into 1670, where unprecedented innovation and prosperity allowed wages to increase significantly, and a large middle class to establish itself through a variety of opportunities for entrepreneurship or through the numerous professions to choose from. And of all European nations, the Dutch enjoyed the most social benefits. Dutch expeditions to Indonesian islands began in 1591 in an effort to enter the intercontinental spice trade. The design likely actually stemmed from resentment when the Portuguese cut Dutch merchants out of trade by choosing to move operations from Antwerp, a historically important distribution centre in Northern Europe and a centre of Dutch commerce and culture, to Hamburg instead, located in present-day Germany. Meanwhile, spices such as pepper oftentimes spiked to astronomical prices because the Portuguese trade system could not satisfy growing demand. This appeared like a good commodity to provide in the economic landscape. The fact that the Portuguese crown was united in a personal union with the Spanish crown in 1580 made the Portuguese Empire an appropriate target for the Dutch military. Dutch merchants and explorers obtained first-hand knowledge of secret Portuguese trade routes and practices, eager to soon become a direct competition. Luckily, the Dutch owned the Sea Marvel fleet, a specialized merchant ship which significantly reduced shipping costs. This would prove to be a powerful advantage. The first Dutch expedition proved risky, resulting in hostile encounters with indigenous people and the Portuguese, who loathed competition. Even so, though the expedition resulted in the death of the majority of the crew, leaving 87 of the original 249 men, the remaining weakened sailors revealed a rather meager load of spices, which, nevertheless, turned a considerable profit, making the voyage decidedly successful. Unsurprisingly, investment in these 2-year-long voyages was high risk, with the constant threats of piracy, disease, and shipwreck. In addition, volatile market conditions where inelastic demand met elastic supply could make prices tumble. Forming a cartel to control supply seemed logical. In 1600, it was the English who first bundled resources into one monopoly enterprise, the English East India Company, threatening Dutch competitors with ruin. The Dutch government followed suit in 1602, sponsoring the creation of a single United East Indies Company to merge all existing Dutch trading firms operating in the East Indies. This union prevented the existing companies from undercutting one another, maximizing overall profits. The VOC logo, possibly the first globally recognized corporate logo, appeared on various corporate items such as cannons and coins. The Dutch went on to eclipse the English trade because the VOC was the first company to go public. Shares in the company could be purchased by any citizen in the Dutch Republic and were bought and sold in open-air secondary markets, such as the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. Amsterdam hastily created the Exchange Bank to facilitate trade and handle stock market transactions, while the Hendrik de Keyser Exchange Building provided a regular meeting place for merchants. The success of the popular stock market could be attributed to VOC pioneering the concept of limited liability for its shareholders. This was innovative in limiting the financial risk of its investors with their initial investments. Before the VOC, joint stock companies involved unlimited liability for shareholders, which meant that they could be liable for company debts beyond their initial investments. Limited liability, however, allowed investors to risk losing only their initial investments in the case of a failure. This understanding allowed the VOC to attract a wider range of investors than historically would partake in such ventures, including many smaller investors, mobilizing significant capital for company efforts. And the Dutch citizenry readily supported the VOC. The generosity of the Dutch people comes from a shared history of pooling resources together for centuries to fight back against the constant threat of flooding. Additionally, the Calvinist work ethic, prevalent among many Protestant refugees, fostered a culture conducive to capitalist development, characterized by hard work, thrift, and striving for profit. This ethic encouraged the populace to view work as a calling and achievement as a sign of virtuous life, further fueling economic activity and openness to investment into productive opportunities. A much greater initial quantity of capital than their English competitor enjoyed, as well as permission to bravely subdue indigenous populations in Asia, allowed the VOC to quickly outpace all European rivals in success and volume moved in the spice trade during the 17th century. The Portuguese, in the meantime, began declining. In 1601, the Dutch had inflicted a decisive defeat on a larger Portuguese fleet, proving that they were a serious competitor. In 1603, the VOC seized Santa Catarina, a 1,500-ton Portuguese merchant carrack, and then captured another with the help of English forces. Proceeds from the sale of the cargo of the two vessels equaled more than 50% of the VOC's original subscription capital. Diplomatic agreements in Europe in 1620 ushered in a period of collaboration between Dutch and English spice traders. They were both, after all, fighting Portuguese forces. This amiableness ended, however, with the Amboina massacre, where 10 Englishmen were arrested, tried and beheaded for conspiracy against the Dutch government. This caused outrage in Europe, and the English mostly withdrew from Indonesia to focus elsewhere, leaving the Dutch in control of Indonesia. In the early years of the company's history, activist shareholders loudly criticized the VOC, in their pamphlets making it abundantly clear that the company did little to create shareholder value. As it was, directors primarily concerned themselves with their own incomes, and the States General treated the company first and foremost as a vehicle for conducting war, in order to safeguard the long-term presence of the Republic in the Far East. Shareholders, on the other hand, sensed that efforts at making the biggest profits possible were not a priority. Luckily, the VOC would come to change its strategy starting in 1619 under the new leadership of Governor-General Jan Pieters Koen. Backed by 19 ships, he stormed Jakarta, driving out the local Banten forces, and from the ashes established Batavia as VOC headquarters. The native people, who were free traders, had resisted Dutch demands for exclusive contracts, and thus were duly punished. Nearly the entire native population of the Banda Islands was driven away, killed or starved to death in an attempt to replace them with Dutch plantations and farmers. On the main island of Lontor, the original 15,000 inhabiting Bandanese were reduced to 1,000, which were used as labourers on the nutmeg plantations. Slaves from West Africa had to be imported annually to maintain a steady labour population. Rulers of other islands in the Moluccas region were forced to deliver spices to the Dutch, or risk the loss of their land, spice crops, or lives. Trading with other European or Asian merchants was swiftly dealt with using military force. To maintain high prices and total control over supply, the VOC restricted the cultivation of spices like cloves to a few specific islands, notably Ambon. The Dutch systematically uprooted and destroyed clove and nutmeg trees on other islands to prevent competition. From around 1620, the VOC started to become profitable. And from 1630 to 1650, the company turned in its best results of the 17th century. Share prices jumped in this period, reflecting expectations of a growing dividend yield. Cohen's most successful venture solved the major problem in European trade with Asia at the time, which was that Asian consumers wanted few European goods. European traders therefore had to pay for spices and other desirable commodities with precious metals, which were in short supply in Europe, except for in Spain and Portugal. The VOC managed to solve this problem by opening the door to Japan's markets, even as it practiced isolationism from the rest of the world. The Dutch brought Asian goods and European technology to Japan in exchange for silver and copper, which was used to trade with the world's wealthiest empires, Mughal India and Qing China, for silk, cotton, porcelain and textiles, which were either traded within Asia for the coveted spices or brought back to Europe. Between 1602 and 1796, The VOC sent nearly 1 million Europeans to work in the Asia trade on 4,785 ships that moved more than 2.5 million tons of Asian trade goods and slaves. By contrast, the rest of Europe combined sent only about 880,000 people from 1500 to 1795. Their distant competitor, the English East India Company, only sent about 2,690 ships and about a fifth of the cargo carried by the VOC. Thanks to its spice monopoly and slave trading activities, the VOC enjoyed tremendous profits. For almost 200 years, the company paid annual dividends that averaged about 18% of the capital. However, good times do not last forever. Because the Netherlands invested nearly all free capital in trade and shipping, the resulting prosperity diverted attention away from domestic industrial development. This resulted in the Dutch lagging behind England in commencing with the Industrial Revolution. The VOC's monopoly in the spice trade eventually broke down as other European companies sought to insert themselves into the global trade, consequently causing the Dutch positions in Asia and Japan to falter. Multiple wars with the British depleted the Dutch ship collection and company capital, leading to financial strain and a reduced capacity to control numerous distant territories. The Dutch were eventually forced to hand over most of the colonial possessions and trade monopolies to the British and French empires. Ultimately, the intervention of the French Republic at home led to the collapse of the Dutch Republic in 1795. The VOC formally dissolved in 1799. The VOC was not alone in rapidly changing the order of the world as a multinational corporation. Many others sprung up in its time period, including the Virginia Company, founded in 1606, which famously established the American colony. It expanded British control over North America, creating an economic basis for a colony while providing raw goods to Great Britain and to its other colonies. The Virginia Company went on to establish the General Assembly, the first legislature in North America. It was understood that corporations could be organized to carry out tasks too great for any one individual, or even one government. This discovery led to monumental shifts in the world order, and the tradition of corporations being managed primarily for the benefit of shareholders remained unchanged, even in the New World. This is well exemplified in the Supreme Court case of Dodge versus Ford Motor Company, where Henry Ford decided to stop paying dividends. In his words, to employ still more men, to spread the benefits of this industrial system to the greatest possible number, and to help them build up their lives and their homes. The court ruled that the profits of a corporation cannot be withheld from stockholders for the benefit of the general public, and that a dividend must be reinstated. Thus, the promise of fantastic returns helped fuel these multinational companies all the more, further shaping the modern world.